Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on your part of the world. Thank you so much for joining us today for this very special webinar reflecting on 20 years of the Tax Justice Network. My name is Nana Amasarfo. I am a contributing editor with Tax Notes International, and I am so thrilled to moderate today's event. I just want to note that we are streaming this presentation in 4 different languages: English, Spanish, Portuguese, and French. If you look toward the bottom of your screen, there is a language box and you can select the best option. And I also just want to note that our speakers today will be presenting in English. Now, we have a very full program packed with video presentations and speakers who are going to offer some reflections on the work that the Tax Justice Network has done over the past 2 decades and offer some of their hopes for the future of tax justice. On my end, as a person who has written about and analyzed international tax policy issues for several years, I have seen the international tax world expand significantly. Several organizations have dedicated their missions to tax justice. And as you will see from today's presentation, that is due in large part to the Tax Justice Network. On the transparency side, we see developments like country by country reporting becoming an international standard. And this is an instrument that the Tax Justice Network championed. Now, we also see that country by country reporting has evolved, and the European Union and Australia are adopting public country by country reporting. And we've seen international tax fora expand, whether that is the OECD inclusive framework putting representatives from developing countries in leadership roles, or the United Nations Tax Committee expanding the number of times it meets per year. We've seen developing countries and emerging economies demand more participation and more leadership in policy making. That includes a current push for the United Nations to create an international tax convention. And we've seen regional groups and regional development banks take a stronger role in international tax policy. Overall, I think it's very safe to say that interest in international tax multilateralism is at a fever pitch. It's the strongest that it ever has been. And with that said, we are at a critical inflection point within international tax policy making. There are several different directions that can be taken, and the question is, which path will be best for all stakeholders involved? So, with all of that said, I'll now provide a quick summary of today's program. First, we'll hear some opening messages from TJN's allies and partners from across the tax justice movement, and this will be in a recorded piece. Then we will hear from Andres Gomez, who is a political scientist from On Think Tanks. Today, the Tax Justice Network is releasing an independent evaluation authored by On Think Tanks on TJN's past 20 years of work. And Andres will present headlines from that evaluation, which is entitled Tracing the History of Tax Justice, an independent assessment of the Tax Justice Network from 2003 through 2023. After that, we will have a roundtable discussion where our panelists will provide some reflections on the evaluation and also on some potential directions that they see for the tax justice movement. And for that portion, we are very pleased to have with us Alex Cobham, who is the Chief Executive of the Tax Justice Network. Also, we have with us Alvin Mosioma, who is the Division Director of Fiscal Justice at the Open Society Foundation. We also have Emilia Reyes, who is Program Director of Policies and Budgets for Equality and Sustainable Development at Gender Equity, Citizenship, Work, and Family. And she is also a non-executive director for the Tax Justice Network. And then after that, we'll have a discussion on looking forward. What is next for the Tax Justice Network's research? And for that, we will be joined by 3 TJN researchers who will share some insights on the organization's future research plans. And they are Florencia Lorenzo, who is a senior researcher with TJN, Sergio Chaparro Hernandez, who is international policy and advocacy lead for the Tax Justice Network, and Miroslav Polansky, who is the organization's head of research. And then after that presentation, we will then hear some closing remarks from allies and partners across the tax justice movement, including Atia Waris, who is the UN independent expert on foreign debt, other international financial obligations and human rights, and also including Joseph Stiglitz, the Nobel Prize winning economist. Now, on that note, I just want to mention that sadly, Irene Avanji Odita can no longer join us for today's session due to illness. We were, of course, very much looking forward to her remarks, but her health is paramount, and we wish her a speedy recovery over the coming days. And finally, to round out the program, I will offer a few closing remarks. So with that said, first up, we'll cut away to our pre-recorded message from TJN's allies and partners. I hope you enjoy.
Quisiera felicitar a la Tax Justice Network por sus 20 años. Durante estos 20 años, la organización ha sido líder en traer una discusión muy importante, que es la discusión de los derechos, que es la discusión de la progresividad, que es la discusión de la justicia, a los temas tributarios. En los temas tributarios normalmente no se hablaba de este tipo de cosas y la organización ha sido líder a nivel mundial en traer estas discusiones. Además, ha hecho un proceso de apoyo a organizaciones de la sociedad civil en otros países y también a gobiernos. Yo quisiera agradecer el apoyo que hemos recibido de la Tax Justice Network en Colombia, no solamente con las propuestas de reformas tributarias progresivas que hemos adelantado aquí en Colombia, sino también en todo el apoyo que nos han dado para la creación de la PETELAC, de la Plataforma de América Latina y el Caribe en temas de tributación, en donde Colombia tiene en este momento la presidencia pro tempore y donde hemos encontrado en la Tax Justice Network siempre una organización amiga, siempre una organización que trae ideas, propuestas y que es definitivamente un gran apoyo. Entonces quería terminar dándole las felicitaciones por estos 20 años de trabajo muy efectivo y muy provechoso.
I think it's fair to say that now across the world, more and more people recognize the importance of a fair and just tax system. And that is due, I believe, in no small measure, to the efforts of Tax Justice Network over the past 20 years. I think in this relatively short time, Tax Justice Network has been a remarkable and increasingly important player in both national and international discussions on how to improve our tax systems, showing how our global tax systems are really not fit for purpose anymore, showing how much more we can do to reduce the inequities that are generated by taxes rather than not simply ameliorated by taxes. So I think that they have done a remarkable job so far. Congratulations to you for everything you've done, but there is so much more to do, and we need your work more than ever. Thank you for doing what you do. I wish you much more power in future.
Hi friends, congratulations for these 20 years. I'm proud to be a co-founder of the TGN, and I had the noble task to chair the global board of TGN for a couple of years. Now I am an old man, no more strongly active at the political front, but I still follow with high interest and respect the activities, interventions and publications of the TGN and the tax justice movement in general. You are doing a very good job, a highly needed job. I wish you a lot of power, fantasy and a long breath to continue your fight for tax justice, for tax and financial transparency. A lucha continua, lucha continua.
Happy birthday, TJN. 20 years is no small feat, but it speaks to the importance of the work that you do as an institution within this broader movement. TJN and TJNA go way back, and it's been interesting to see over time the way in which our relationship has evolved. But I think most importantly, the work that TJN does in developing research that we are then able to use in our broader advocacy is unparalleled. The identification of the true actors that are responsible for the deficiencies that we have in our international tax system is so important. And so urge you to continue to do that even as you think about what the next 20 years is going to look like. So on that note, once again, happy birthday, TJN, and we look forward to continuing to work together.
Happy 20th birthday, Tax Justice Network. What an incredible job you've done over the past 20 years of elevating the conversation around tax justice, confronting tax abuse, even when the powerful are doing it, and increasingly learning how to do it in a way that does not exploit racial bias. So many could learn so much from you, and so many have. I hope that you continue the excellent work you've been doing, and that you keep having the impact that you've had over the past 20 years in the years going forward. Happy birthday and good luck.
In the past 20 years, Tax Justice Network has greatly contributed to changing the narrative around taxation. For example, it has helped develop a better understanding on how tax policies affect enjoyments of human rights. Without progressive taxation, governments do not have sufficient resources for the provision of rights such as education, health, food, water and sanitation, among other basic human rights. They are also essential to foster stronger governance, gender equality, and participation in public affairs. The progress made has been enormous, but we still face a great deal of opposition. The work of Tax Justice Network is needed now more than ever. Happy 20th anniversary.
Dear Tax Justice Network, the tide is turning. Over the past 20 years, tax avoidance and evasion have become a hot topic of debate at national and global level. And it's not a coincidence, I like to think, that Tax Justice Network has been fueling that debate for 20 years. A good understanding, solid research, to-the-point policy advice and clear communication. It is that combination that allows you to expose what cannot stand the light of day and allows you to raise public and political awareness on the inefficiency and above all the unfairness of the industry of tax evasion and avoidance. From this awareness follows action. The public dismay will sooner or later translate into political action. The public call for tax justice is impossible to ignore for politicians. Of course, at the same time, not all people like your work. Some hate your work, some hate you. They hate you because they know that you are right. To end, let me say, thank you for all the good work so far. Keep up the good work. Keep on fighting for tax justice. Happy anniversary.
The Tax Justice Network makes a powerful case for understanding tax as a social contract between citizens and the state. Its recent focus on reparations connects current inequalities with past injustices and seeks to find a way forward together. Thanks for all the work you've done over the past 20 years, and happy birthday.
Hi everyone, my name is Adrian Falco. I work in Fiscal Justice Network from Latin America and the Caribbean. Just to say happy birthday, TGN. You are the most important think tank in Europe, and we are learning all the time with your investigations, with your papers. Just say happy birthday again, and for another 20 years. Thank you.
Happy birthday to the Tax Justice Network. I'm Abdul Mohit Chaudhary from the South Center. It has really been an incredible 20 years of TJN's contribution to the global tax justice movement. In fact, they are in many ways the genesis of the global tax justice movement and have inspired other such movements around the world. They've also put tax justice firmly on the global agenda, away from the prevailing view that taxes were a burden on the economy and avoiding them was a smart thing to do, and away from that very regressive and narrow view towards the clear view that taxes form the foundation of public finance and healthy societies and economies. TJN's research and advocacy, in particular their products like the Financial Secrecy Index, the Corporate Tax Haven Index, their annual State of Tax Justice Report, and their advocacy on some of the pressing issues of the time. As we speak, for example, on a UN tax convention, where they have really played a big role in mobilizing support for this historic step towards global tax justice. They really remain at the cutting edge, including, as we have seen, their newest vertical on climate and tax justice. So TJN's role and the tax justice movement's role more broadly will only grow in the future as multinational companies expand, as the global economy becomes ever more tightly knit, and as the need for taxes continue to grow, and as the role of tax in financing the SDGs in particular becomes, I mean, it's all recognized how important that is. So the next 20 years are going to be as exciting as the previous 20 years, and we are looking forward to TJN's many contributions that are undoubtedly going to come.
20 years shaking the tree. 20 years producing interesting analysis which are generally presented in a spicy manner so as to trigger the attention. 20 years is usually an age where people are very active, very dynamic, in full possession of their capacity, and I can certainly testify that Tax Justice Network is very good and very active at pestering us for a good cause. Happy birthday.
Happy anniversary indeed. And as Benjamin Angel so astutely mentioned, it certainly has been 20 years of shaking the tree. And I just want to extend my warm thanks to all of the video participants for their accolades. Next, I'm going to hand over the floor to Andres Gomez, who I previously mentioned is a political scientist with On Think Tanks. And he is going to share some top lines from today's evaluation, including some of the Tax Justice Network's largest milestones. So with that, Andres, I hand you the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can do both.
Okay, great. So very happy to be here. It's impressive to hear all those congrats you've got today. Today, so as you were saying, I'll be sharing some of the findings from our assessment of TJN's influence on tax justice. However, I do encourage you to look at the report in detail. I will share the link later on, or maybe someone else could help me share the link. And please do share with us any idea, comment, criticism, or project that comes to mind after reading the report. We will be happy to open a conversation. Next slide, please. I will divide the presentation into parts. It's going to be a short comment on the methodology. I will then list the pivotal moments or milestones that we analyzed, and then pick on 4 of them to share our thinking. And to conclude, I will go through key findings. So, next slide, please. Purpose and empirical strategy. What we wanted to know. First of all, we started with this question: what are the most relevant moments for narrative, movement, and policy change within the tax justice movement? The report identifies 9 pivotal moments based on interviews. Subsequently, we unpacked these moments, trying to determine if and how TJN exerted any influence on their occurrence. We wanted to see the mechanisms that were activated by TJN. And we contend that by discerning the mechanisms that drive change, we could also offer some valuable insights into future action. There were some simple hypotheses that we had in mind throughout the study, and which were addressed throughout the report. So the first one was TJN has catalyzed a global tax justice movement over the last 20 years. The second one, TJN's activities, meaning research, advocacy, communications, and campaigning, have contributed to changing narratives about tax. And the third one, TJN has contributed to policy changes on issues at a national, regional, and global level. So that's the general framework on which we worked. Now let's go to the milestones. So as I told you, we identified 9 milestones. You can see them here, or pivotal moments from the latest history of tax justice. Some, of course, were mentioned more frequently than others. So here I can think of particularly country-by-country reporting, the financial crisis, the Financial Secrecy Index, and the UN Tax Convention. Most of the people interviewed were focusing on these events. So in what follows, I will refer to some of the conclusions that we arrived at in regards to 4 of these milestones. I won't take much of your time. But before that, I would like to clarify why we included the Oxfam paper in 2000, since the scope of the research was 2003-2023. This paper I'm referring to, which is actually titled Tax Havens, Releasing the Hidden Billions of Poverty Eradication, was the first to address the link between taxation and development within the developmental sector itself. But more importantly to us, this paper benefited from the contribution of John Christensen, who then moved on to create the Tax Justice Network. We contend that this entrepreneurial capacity that it had holds the potential to be highly beneficial for creating new civil society organizations in areas of the world where the tax justice movement is still absent. And this seems like an important observation because it's what actually triggers everything that we are celebrating here and what we are talking about today. So let's move on to share some of the other findings that we had. Okay, as I told you, I'm going to concentrate on 4 milestones. The first one is the creation of the Tax Justice Network Africa. The second one is country-by-country reporting. The third one are the indices. And the last one is the UN Tax Convention. So regarding TJN Africa, here we can also see the action, in action, the entrepreneurial spirit that we just prized from John Christensen. In this case, it was Derje Alemajeu who sought the financial support from Christian Aid and set up TJN Africa, inspired by the early work of TJN. Today, TJN Africa is composed of 44 members representing 26 African countries. It's a huge and very important organization. But from our perspective, what was really interesting to see, which is from the movement building perspective, I mean, this is a very important milestone because it seems to kickstart a diffusion process of tax justice organizations. This diffusion process has a very particular thing, and is that TJN seems to be like the central node within this network. We identified 29 different organizations that have emerged since 2005, all founded by individuals with some sort of affiliation to TJN. So there seems to be an inspirational influence of TJN in the professional trajectory of individuals that work with them or for them. It's very difficult to think of similar examples in the social policy world. I couldn't come up with any of them. And if something, it's actually the opposite that I can think of. People that go to work in one of the big development or humanitarian agencies, and afterwards they most probably say, okay, I want to change my career path. But what we see here in terms of the people that work with TJN, it's really impressive. Now, the number of tax justice organizations created in the last year seems to be slowing down. This leads to a question: are current organizations consolidating, or is there a declining interest in setting up new organizations? I think this is an empirical question that remains to be solved. But judging by the first set of congratulations to TJN, I wouldn't think it's a lack of enthusiasm, but it's maybe a consolidation of organizations that have been setting up in the last 10 or 20 years. Furthermore, we contend that this inspirational influence also extends to an academic dimension. The original network of academics and former members at TJN seem to have nurtured and inspired a new generation of tax justice scholars. To validate this observation, we compared research impact as measured by Google Scholar between current staff at TJN and professionals in similar research and advocacy organizations. TJN staff are consistently more driven to produce academic research, and we contend that this is a distinct feature of the diffusion mechanism. Just to make it clear, this mechanism is simply defined as the transmission of everyday practices within closely knit ecosystems. So lastly, in terms of this milestone, we claim that if there was a conscious awareness of this diffusion mechanism, there could be a more deliberate effort to encourage tax justice organization, advocates, and research in regions where the tax justice movement has not yet flourished. Just to clarify, in the report you can find most of the evidence that we collected. Here I'm just trying to provide a cohesive narrative of our findings, but we made a strong effort in substantiating all this with empirical evidence and analytical narratives. So going on to the country-by-country reporting. I think it's widely known that Richard Murphy is widely recognized as the intellectual father of this instrument. As Murphy himself explains, this is an instrument not only for deterring profit shifting, but to promote accountability and assessing local economic dependency. And we trace in the document how different legislation since 2003 has partially implemented the original version of country-by-country reporting, limiting its reach to certain industries, limiting the availability of information, and limiting the jurisdiction obliged to report. So we claim that the incremental adoption of country-by-country reporting is explained by a concatenation of events from many different events that we traced. We'll name a few here. So from the practical benefits of the proposal itself compared to current tax frameworks, going through the financial crisis and its capacity to accelerate change, all the way to the political capacity of John Christensen, Richard Murphy, to navigate multiple professional ecosystems and install the idea. So how does this experience informs the policy change that can be sought by organizations like TJN? That's the question that we made. We think the success of country-by-country reporting as a technical framework conceived within civil society with profound implications for tax accountability is sort of an exceptional occurrence. It's improbable that similar success can be routinely replicated. And please emphasize the word routinely replicated. We don't mean that these big changes won't happen, but that they will take time. Therefore, our claim is that pursuing small, tactical, and incremental transformations should be the rule. And in other words, incremental progress is good, and you should not get discouraged if policy change takes a long time. This is important because throughout the document, we mention the importance of setting up monitoring and learning systems that keep up with the organization and allows them to take informed decisions on what are the next goals to be achieved. Then in terms of the indices, the third milestone I will be talking about, the financial secrecy index was born out of discomfort with the predominant narrative about geographical distribution of corruption. It has demonstrated through empirically grounded research that the sources of massive corruption are completely the opposite to those pointed by other indices. In this sense, the financial secrecy index and corporate tax haven index have played a pivotal role in reshaping narratives within policy and academic circles. And there are at least two tangible mechanisms that TJN activated to influence this narrative change. So first, the academic rigor exhibited in the design, testing, and deployment of the indices. Based on the history that we revised, you could track all the detail and all the effort put into building the indices, and that's remarkable. And second, the capacity to translate the indices into a comprehensible narrative for many audiences. So to assess the first claim, we compared the Financial Secrecy Index to other relevant and widely used datasets and indices, mostly used in my area of knowledge, my area of expertise. So, of course, this is a limited comparison. But it was a simple exercise to test for academic rigor of the methodological note, the presence of strong critiques, and the research impact of the methodological note. So that was what we wanted to see from other indices, and you could tell from the comparison that the Financial Secrecy Index is highly credible if measured by these criteria. Again, you can see in the report what were the other indices and data set we compared with, and most of them are widely known. Now, in terms of translating the indices into a comprehensible narrative, we contend that the possibility of using a ranking and constructing an argument based on a country's placement within that ranking has likely heightened its appeal to audiences without technical expertise. And here I do something that it's contentious to prove the point, and it's that I cite some instances where politicians have been using or citing the index to substantiate their arguments. So, of course, what's contentious is that you may say politicians are technical experts. So we could debate on that. But the point here is that the capacity to have an index and to claim where your country is in that range makes it easier for people to use it and to claim there's a possibility for change. What are the implications of this thinking, of this argument for TJN? We contend that the prolonged and consistent production of indices will enhance their credibility, also inspiring a wider research agenda. And this is important because throughout the research, we came across some positions that claim that TJN has put too much effort, time, human capital on working on the indices, and that was not the original purpose. And that's good, but our position in the team is that this could actually become one of the strong outputs of TJN. And with time, it could be part of very robust academic work that allows for longitudinal studies of taxation. So we contend that if the production of indices is continued, this could actually provide a lot of benefit in the long term. I'll continue with the fourth milestone, which is the UN Tax Convention. So in this section, we trace the road towards a UN Tax Convention, showing how most meetings, panels, reports cite in one way or another the tax loss estimates produced by TJN. The estimates of tax loss as an argument for a UN Tax Convention has been so prevalent that 83% of media stories on UN Tax Convention also mention TJN. That's impressive. Anyone who wants to go and get informed on what's happening around a UN Tax Convention most probably will come across the data and actually the name of TJN. At least since 2011, we can trace a call for a UN Tax Convention from TJN. And this speaks of its consistency with its platform. Finally, we argue that TJN has managed to become this preeminent source to substantiate tax justice grievances. We can see this here in the UN Tax Convention, but also with the use of indices and the use of the empirical data that other organizations around tax justice do with their data. So these are only some examples of the mechanisms through which TJN has been able to trigger pivotal moments in the recent history of tax justice. And now I will share with you the key findings. So in terms of evidence-based advocacy, doing advocacy based on evidence means putting science first. This might be obvious when we are all interested in taxation, which, I mean, it's one of the most interesting fields of study, and that obviously entails working with data. But unfortunately, this is not the rule. I think we do not always find organizations that substantiate their claims with the rigor and enough evidence. So we think that sticking to the principle of producing science-based outputs is a winning strategy towards sustainability and professionalization. And TJN seems to be going down that road. It's also important to say this because as someone that's part of a team that defends evidence-based policy, it's important for us to encourage this practice. In terms of media and outreach, TJN has become the low-hanging fruit for media outlets, development organizations, and government institutions to get informed, explain, substantiate, and assess arguments in the tax justice space. This was evident throughout the research that we did. There are plenty of relations with many scholars, newspapers, things like that. The scope and reach of its media audience grows exponentially. Every time there's a new publication, there's more people interested. But we advise against making media hits the measure of success. I think this is very important. We did not come across a monitoring and learning system that allows institutional goals to be assessed or which substantiates decision-making. And with the implementation of a monitoring system, most probably the goals in the short, medium, and long term will have more strong indicators than media likes and things like that. Then, indices and knowledge production. The annual State of Tax Justice report and indices seem to have become a central part of TJN's work. This is appreciated by partners. Actually, some of them mentioned that previously in the Global South, partners in the Global South. Because all this empirical data provides the inputs for their advocacy work. And partners are really grateful for that. Now, in terms of appropriation of research agendas, we also found that the appropriation of indices is still overwhelmingly Eurocentric. This means scientific research that uses the indices have minimal references to jurisdictions in the Global South. There's a great opportunity then to promote the use of indices for scholarly work in Africa and Latin America. Regarding the UN Tax Convention, the journey towards the UN Tax Convention has been significantly underpinned by arguments and evidence put forth by TJN over the past decade. This seems a key achievement and exemplifies the sort of goals that TJN should be monitoring and analyzing and reframing all the time through a monitoring system. Now, in terms of catalyzing a movement, I think TJN has had two main avenues for catalyzing the movement. One avenue entails this diffusion mechanism I talked about at the beginning, wherein internal staff and close associates draw inspiration from TJN and establish their own tax justice initiatives or a research agenda. And the other one involves providing support and convening global meetings, primarily led by leaders from the Global South. So they're completely different strategies. One's more active and one is more passive, if you will, but they're like equally important in terms of sustaining different levels, different dimensions of relation with the global movement. Now, in terms of gender and human rights research, we saw that gender and human rights have been rightfully integrated into the tax justice network. For this, the Lima and Bogota declarations were very important, but also the Global Alliance for Tax Justice. Nevertheless, there are areas that have not yet been a matter of regular scientific inquiry that leads to publications. So when you look at the impact of TJN in terms of the research that has been done based on their indices, based on their empirical work, most of it still concerns the tax situation in Europe, and that makes sense. I mean, they're closer to that information. It's more familiar for them to get a hold of that information. But it could be interesting and desirable to try to diffuse again this data into a broader context. So scholarly audiences in, at least, I only mention Africa and Latin America because those are the places that kept on coming in the research. But at least in those polities, it would be interesting to have more access to this information and to produce work in terms of gender and human rights. And finally, in terms of movement building, it seems that the tax justice movement relies on tax justice to do some of the international empirical work that serves as the basis for their activist work. I've mentioned this. However, even without their involvement, the movement is composed of very independent and influential organizations in their own right. So we found that there's already a vigorous civil society movement for tax justice in Africa and Latin America, at least in those places. And this independence and this division of labor, if you wish, should remain in such a way. That's it for my part, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you very much.
Andres, thank you so much for that very comprehensive overview. Definitely, if we have any spare time at the end of today's presentation, we'll circle back with some questions. But I want to move on to Alex Cobham, who will offer some remarks of thanks. And Alex, the floor is now yours.
Thanks, Nana. And thank you to everyone who's turned up today to see this slightly epic 20-year evaluation. I do have to make a whole set of thanks, and it's inevitable that, you know, trying to cover 20 years of history in 2 minutes, I will miss many. So just to say, if I'm missing people, I'm sorry, but I'm just trying to give a flavour of the type of partners and people that the Tax Justice Network has worked with over the years. Let me start by thanking Andres and his team at On Think Tanks, who've done, I think, an extraordinary job in bringing together so many different perspectives, so much evidence, so much data in order to tell this story. And you know, the Tax Justice Network is not a simple organization, and the way that we work has always been about shifting narratives, the understanding that you can get an individual policy win sometimes, but it won't stick unless you've shifted the underlying public and political narrative about what needs to happen, and that's ultimately the goal. And of course, that's much harder to measure. That's one of the reasons, perhaps, why tax justice is harder to fund than seeking bed nets to fight malaria, perhaps, but not any less important. Perhaps the opposite when you think of the kind of systemic global changes that this movement has contributed to over these 20 years. In trying not to speak too quickly, let me also thank the translators here today and remind everyone that you can pick this up also in French and Spanish and Portuguese if you prefer. Perhaps the key partner, and this is something that emerges very clearly in the evaluation, the key partner for the Tax Justice Network has been and continues to be the Global Alliance for Tax Justice, including the regional networks, La Red de Justicia Fiscal, TAFJA in Asia, Tax Justice Network Africa, Tax Justice Europe, and the Tax Justice Movement in North America. At the same time, we've been part of the Financial Transparency Coalition, which includes many of those organizations on tax, and also a set of transparency organizations. And together, those two bodies have really pushed this forward at the global level, particularly over the last 10 years. Key partners have also come from the human rights movement, organisations like the Centre for Economic and Social Rights and the Global Initiative, GIESCR, as well as in the Global Alliance, the Working Group on Tax and Gender. We've heard about, and you see more in the evaluation, about allied organisations like ICRICT, SICTAR, as well as national tax justice networks from Norway to Australia. Another set of key partners has been in the media. That includes individual journalists and outlets all around the world, also some key organisations like Finance Uncovered and the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, whose work has been nothing short of world-shifting in this area. Also important, if sometimes less high profile, are some of the key research organisations. The International Centre for Tax and Development, originally set up by Professor Mick Moore, GRADE at the University of St Andrews, led by Dr. Bernadette O'Hare, and the EU Tax Observatory, led by Gabriel Zuckman. And of course, individual academics and activists have played a key role, and there are simply too many for me to mention. Though among our senior advisors, we could perhaps think particularly of Professor Sol Picciotto and Atiya Waris, who I think you'll hear from later. Then there's been important work from parliamentarians, again, all around the world, from Letito Kabwe in Tanzania to Dame Margaret Hodge in the UK, other politicians, including Andres Arauz in Ecuador, and national leaders from former South African President Thabo Mbeki to former British Prime Minister Gordon Brown. In terms of some key organisations, governmental and intergovernmental, we can think of the role played by the organisations of tax authorities, including ATAF, the African Tax Administrators Forum, or SIAT in Latin America. National governments in every region of the world, where we often work with regional partners and form close collaborations, for example in Nigeria, or we have more testing but constructive critical engagement with governments like that in the Netherlands. Then intergovernmental organisations and key staff there, from the G24 group and the South Centre to UN bodies including UNCTAD, UN DESA, the regional commissions including the ECA, ESQUA, ECLAC, the UN Tax Committee, of course, also the IMF and the World Bank, the European Commission, from whom we heard earlier, and yes, even the OECD, where at many points we've worked closely, at least with individuals, despite finding issues with their overall agenda. Now, I have to mention funders, partly because everyone, including us, always needs money, but mainly because the funders in this area are relatively few. The amount of money that's gone into this whole movement over 20 years is very, very little compared to, for example, what some individual organisations have taken in for anti-malaria bed nets. And so each of the funder decisions behind that has been significant. And I want to raise up a few in particular that have been particularly significant for the Tax Justice Network. So one, really a supporter from quite early on, is the Joffe Trust in the UK, set up by Joel Joffe, who was, of course, famously Nelson Mandela's lawyer, and also ensured at a key point, really, the ability of the Tax Justice Network to survive and develop its vision. The Ford Foundation, and in particular, when this area of work was led by Rakesh Rajani, was absolutely pivotal. And the build program that they have, providing funds to support the resilience of the organization, allow us to get from thinking about survival to thinking about the kind of strategic shifts that are possible, particularly the work we've heard about on the UN Tax Convention. The Open Society Foundation is a leading supporter today, again providing important core funding, and NORAD, the Norwegian government, has been a key and almost constant support through that time. And each of them, of course, is part of the umbrella group, the Transparency and Accountability Initiative. More recent funders include Wellspring and Louders. And I want to particularly reference the importance of some smaller supporters we've had over the years, including the RH Southern Trust, but also what we call our fire starters, a group of individuals from the island of Jersey who came together initially to raise funds so that the Tax Justice Network could actually get started, get off the ground. And finally, people in the Tax Justice Network itself, current and former members of the team and members of the board, whose contribution really has been enormous. And it's never a job that you do for a little bit and then switch off. It's something that people really commit great parts of their life to, and we are indebted to everyone who has committed. Who, again, I can't name, but you all know who you are. Okay, enough of my thanks, and perhaps enough to some extent of the backslapping, although there have been enormous achievements over these 20 years. I want to introduce a couple of really exciting people to have conversation with, looking back and looking forward and thinking about where the movement as a whole can go. Now, first is Alvin Mosioma, who's now the Division Director for Fiscal Justice in the global programs of the Open Society Foundations, but of course was also the founding Executive Director of Tax Justice Network Africa and ran that organization for a great many years. And secondly, Emilia Reyes, now one of our non-executive directors, but in her day job, the Program Director of Policies and Budgets for Equality and Sustainable Development at Equidad de Género Ciudadana, Trabajo y Familia, based in Mexico. Alvin and Emilia, thank you both for joining. I want to ask, and I kind of want to get into some of the more difficult questions and think about, in a sense, all the things we've done wrong, as well as some of the stuff that we've achieved. And I think you each have a particular perspective on these. But perhaps I start with a slightly easier question to you, to Alvin. I remember when the Tax Justice Network Africa was formally launched at the World Social Forum in Nairobi in 2007, and I think you'd effectively been running it before that formal launch for the best part of 2 years already. So it's almost of an age with Tax Justice Network. So you've really been around from pretty much the very beginning, and you've seen both the Tax Justice Network and the broader movement develop over that period, while running, what is and remains the largest and most, I think, can I say this, most successful of the regional networks. So I wonder now, perhaps with a little bit of distance of, having moved to OSF, what you think of when you look back in terms of the greatest successes of the movement, and also if you can, the greatest failures. What was really right, and what perhaps was the thing that we got wrong. Where would you go back and change things?
Thank you very much, Alex. And really personally enjoyed everyone who has spoken before me to congratulate the Tax Justice Network for, I think, what has not been a simple task, getting to 20 and all the things that you've been able to achieve in this time is really something that we should be celebrating, and is worth celebrating. So I think that in terms of measuring, it will be difficult, of course, in a very short time to really pack everything that TJN has been able to deliver over this very short time. But when I look at successes, I think looking back over the last 20 years, when I first, I think, met you and John and others, the concept of tax and the people that was pushing this idea of tax justice was seen as strange animals. The concept itself and the agenda that the tax justice movement more broadly was pushing was seen as something that was rather strange. I remember the situation, one of the meetings I was going to in Lusaka, or one of the awareness training meetings we were organizing, where I met someone. It was like, so getting to chat, and they asked, so what do you do? I told them I work on tax, and the very first thing they came, also, you work with the government. I told them, no, I don't work with the government.
and then you must be working with the big four, or that neither. So then it's like, so what exactly then you do? As I work in tax justice, and that combination of the word tax and justice, you could see the guy struggling to understand how the two fit together. So I think in terms of success, the tax justice network with the collaborating institutions and partners have managed to provide an uncontested political framing of the idea of tax justice. And I think that for a very short time, actually, when you think about 20 years might be a long time, but it's a very short time to bring this concept to the mainstream of economic justice conversation. Not even just looking at the very specific policy issues, that the fact that there's a wide recognition that taxation is at the heart of any conversation on economic development, I think is a very, very important and no mean achievement. Second, building upon that, I think that even the specific concepts and policy demands that the TJN kind of initiated country by country, when we talk of the ABC of tax, beneficial ownership, country by country reporting, automatic exchange of information. These were concepts that were totally outside the mainstream, but now you find that they have found their way into in terms of the broader discussion of international tax reform. So I think those are some of the successes that comes to mind. When you look at the failures, I would not really look at them as failures, but still areas of that stuff that we still needs to be done. And here, what specifically comes to mind is I don't think that we have managed to really bridge the gaps of the different contestations within the tax justice space. Here, for example, we look at the contestation between tax being a political versus technical agenda. I think that really there's need to do more in terms of how we kind of bridge the gaps between pushing a political narrative and embedding that with very thorough and robust research and technical analysis that goes with it. The same applies, for example, and I think it did come out in the presentation, the North-South divide, which of course, as you remember, led to the birth of the Global Alliance for Tax Justice. Really, how do we ensure that across not just taxation, across the other different realms of reforms, there's a trend and a tendency that these conversations are dominated by northern governments, northern institutions, northern organizations, and little effort is done to be able to create kind of an inclusive space. So I think bridging that gap between the North and the South, and here we see particularly on the tax space the role that the African continent has played in the policy level in terms of leading the reforms of the UN, the role that Nigeria, particularly the Africa Group more specifically, in terms of setting the agenda and leading the conversation on the reforms of the international tax agenda is one, I think, which speaks to some of the uniqueness of the work, but there's still more work that I think needs to be done here. Then I think also, of course, the balance between technical organizations and social movements. I think we look at tax as a political conversation. How do we ensure that other social movements are actually engaged in this discussion? It does not, tax is considered particularly that is seen as this very complex agenda. How do we embed it within the social movements by simplification, by ensuring that we are making the connections, not tax just not as tax as a standalone agenda, but how it connects to the sustainable development goals, how it connects to the access to public services, health and education, and others, and that as a basis for actually building a more broader social movement on that. In terms of opportunity, probably stop here. I think that the very unique opportunity we have now of what has been, I think, one of the biggest goals of the movement on tax justice, and this really delegitimizing the role that OECD plays or has taken in terms of leading the international reforms of taxation, and this through consolidating the process and the momentum we have seen within the UN process. Of course, it's not going to be an easy journey. I think it's the biggest fight ahead of the tax justice movement, and how then we combine the different capabilities of the different organizations and create that big umbrella that can kind of create the tide and break the resistance that we are likely to see from institutions and governments that are currently benefiting from the status quo. So I think that provides the biggest opportunity right now, and then I think how we then think through the next couple of not just years but weeks, because of course the process has already started in the process. So it's urgent, it's important, and I think that's where I see the greatest opportunity right now to consolidate the gains that have been made over the last couple of years, and ensuring that this unique opportunity we have of really moving the world conversation to the UN, we're able to achieve and deliver that.
Thanks, Alvin. I mean, there's so much in there. I think a key point really that we're thinking about now, that it sort of relates to two issues you raised. It's clear that the work that you and Tax Justice Network Africa did, particularly in the Stop the Bleeding campaign, the way that has and continues to combine political engagement across the whole region with social movement engagement, and the strength that has given the agenda, and continuing over time through to now we see the Africa Group leading at the UN this process towards a convention. None of that is coincidence, and and you should take a great deal of credit for that, because that combination is something that we as a broader movement, I think, haven't replicated at the same level anywhere else. And yet it's clearly what we need. And I do think the UN Convention now is the opportunity for that, for the kind of regional convenings and processes to build positions, to go into negotiations, to say, this is not just a technical position, not just a position informed by the people who get in the room, as it were, but that broader movement's position, and the holding government's feet to the fire to make sure they're in there, taking that position. It feels like the model that we should all be aiming to learn from.
Very true.
Look, I have to pick up on a different point you made and turn it to Emilia. Emilia, you've been a leading activist for many years and joined our board last year, but in a sense you're much more of an outsider to tax justice. I mean that in a positive way. So you have a kind of valuably different perspective, I think. And you're also famous for calling on international NGOs in the global north to stay in their lane, as it were. Having seen the evaluation and heard the conversation today, I want to ask you this. You've heard something of the failings of the Tax Justice Network, and particularly in regard to the global movement, how that gave rise to the Global Alliance for Tax Justice. And really that we're still working on building and rebuilding relationships there. But also more positive, I think, the kind of catalytic role that the Tax Justice Network had. But I wonder what lessons you think we need to draw from from that history, in order to make sure that we're making the contribution that we can do going forward from today, that we're not repeating mistakes, and that we're really contributing to build that movement as strongly as we could.
Yes, thank you so much. Congratulations and happy anniversary for everybody, for the team, for the effort, for the projection towards the future. So this is a very, very happy moment for me to be here. As we are in the Latin region, we're very much like fiesta. So hopefully everybody is also going afterwards to celebrate properly. So I want to start saying that I very much appreciated being in this space, especially because the role of tax in colonial dominance of the Global South and imperial practices in the Global South has been key, not only at the beginnings of the let us say, of the colonial project, but even now today. So for us, I think the main, for us, and what I mean is the social movements of the Global South. This is a key issue that goes at the heart of what Alvin was mentioning about the tension between the technical and the political debate. And the technical can very much lead to actually more oppression without a proper framework for political fight. And I just want to say that for me, for many feminists in the Global South, the fight is not for development. And it's not for human rights understood in a colonial interpretation based on individual people, but rather on a collective well-being that goes beyond the usual understanding in a liberal framework. And also, it's not also about a white, liberal, or identity feminist interpretation of what is feminist liberation. We really want to break the system, challenge the system. We don't want to be included in a system that is oppressing people. And we don't think any community deserves to be included in an oppressive system. So this is why the role of tax is key, because on one hand, it can lead to an oppressive system, and on the other, it is a path for liberation. But I think at this point, with the global dynamics, from the South, we also see in a very critical manner the role of global North organizations, networks, INGOs, and citizens overall in sometimes being either passively observing the role of powerful entities in the global North, or others making complacency in the discourses as their role. And just want to say very clearly, for us, the OECD, the facing on the OECD position is not about a technical challenge. It's really that the OECD is part of a colonial project that we are seeing unfolding in front of our eyes. And I just want to see that colonialism is not a metaphor. We're seeing what is happening right now in Palestine with the alliance and the how do you say it in English? The complacency, the complicity of global North countries, of powerful countries that want to maintain their colonial and imperial dominance, crushing people that they think that are subhumans. And I think overall, that is the vision that they have for the entire global South. And that pertains also with many challenges that should be at the core of the political interpretation of tax, such as, for instance, the ecological ecological crisis that we call ecocide at the moment, that is related to also many genocides that are happening in the global South related to other agendas. But in the end, what I would like to convey as a message is that we are in a pivotal moment in the face of a possible UN tax convention. And it can go either way, as we have seen also in the UN with the corporate capture. But the liberation way should be led by the global South, the global South movements. I think Alvin also has mentioned this in a different manner, but to us, this is key, because it's not about providing inputs to the global South so that they can liberate themselves. It's rather how we can challenge the global North, because they are having this colonial imperial project. And therefore, how is it that the technical inputs have this target in mind? So to me, this is very key. And this is also why the alliances are so important. I am very critical of INGOs, global North networks, because they very easily can go into this complacency discourse, and the global South will never. So PJN at this moment has been leading on some pioneering thinking. And I think this needs to go hand in hand with this bigger framework that which is a decolonial project, which is an anti-imperial project. And so this is why, to me, I think we need global North organization to tackle power in the global North So in the upcoming years, in the upcoming not only weeks towards a UN tax convention, what is going to be that positioning of tax of TJN in challenging not only OECD but other power structures to help us achieve that decolonial project? Not tax justice, a decolonial project, of which tax justice is a key part. I'll stop here.
Thanks, Emilia, and thanks, Alvin. Look, I wish we could get now, retreat back to the green room and continue this over an ice cream. But unfortunately, we're all on different sides of the world. We'll have to continue another time. I have let us run over time. So.
Beer, Alex.
Okay, we can negotiate ice cream and beer. Yeah. Look, thank you both so much. There's a lot for us to think about there and in this evaluation, but I have let us run over time. So let me hand back to Nana to pick this up again with my apologies.
Thank you so much to the group for your remarks. Now, in the interest of time, we're going to move on to our next panel of presenters. And we are very happy to have with us Miroslav Polansky, Florencia Lorenzo, and Sergio Chaparro Hernandez, who, as I had previously mentioned, are all with the Tax Justice Network, and they will talk a bit about the organization's research priorities. So I hand over the floor to all three of you.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to start this and then we'll follow from there. And the idea is that each of us is going to talk a bit about the different projects that the organization is working on. And we thought it might make sense to start with the indices, which have been such central projects in our organization's work, and which, as the evaluation showed and Andres highlighted, they have been also instrumental in reshaping the discourse surrounding tax abuse and on the geography of illicit financial flows in a broad sense. I've been involved with the index research for 2.5 years now, and I'm always very consistently impressed by the depth of research that goes into each index. So I just wanted to recap a bit that history and then also present what we are looking for in the future. So the Financial Secrecy Index has been in existence for just over a decade, and the CTHI, the Corporate Tax Haven Index, has been active for about 5 years now. And I would say that despite their relatively short history, they've made such a substantial impact in the narratives on the geography of tax havery, corruption, and corporate tax abuse that they cannot be ignored. And here, I think it's important to highlight, and I think that this was already present in some of the discussions, but his fight against tax abuse has historically been ridden with a lot of hypocrisy, with powerful nations often targeting smaller developing countries, often with predominantly brown and black populations. This Steve Dean, who sent his video at the beginning, he has written about this, and I really recommend his writings. But I think that no one can ignore anymore that much has changed. I think that a very good example of this was that last week the EU released its own blacklist of tax havens, once again demonstrating such a huge level of hypocrisy, as none of its own members are included, and more importantly, perhaps, that even other powerful countries are not included within this list. And the pushback against this list in social media by academics, journalists, and CSOs was huge. And I think that we cannot disconnect the pushback that this hypocritical list received from the publications of the indices and the impact that they have. And this is very clearly shown in the evaluation about how the indices have managed to become an empirical basis to challenging the prevailing notions about the geography and the distribution of corruption and illicit financial flows. Today, I think no one can ignore anymore the fact that powerful countries such as the US and other OECD members are key enablers of illicit financial flows. And the efficacy of these indices, I think it hinges very much on the foundations that it has on robust and thorough research. This coupled with the huge links that we have with other organizations that have helped make the indices such a disseminated output, and which has so much impact in both at academic level, but also within political discussions. And they have undergone through recent years multiple and significant developments. They have undergone multiple consultations and also external evaluations. And yeah, just to, so those that are maybe not familiar with the intricacy of the indices, they are composed of two main dimensions. The first of them is composed of like policy and legal research, which aims for the FSI to map the legal frameworks that foster financial secrecy, while for the corporate tax haven index, we focus on the legal provisions that facilitate corporate tax abuse. And the second dimension, and I think that this is a key point in which we diverge from traditional blacklists, is that we also balance the impact of the legal framework with the actual consequences of those frameworks, right? So for the FSI, we look at whether jurisdictions export financial services, and for the CTHI, we look at the scale of multinational corporations' activities within it. With this, we try to map and reshape the discourse on the impact of those legal provisions. And just to wrap up, we are currently on the process of reimagining and reforming the indices. And in broad terms, we are moving away from large annual launches towards a dynamic rolling update approach. This approach, we hope, will enable us to swiftly incorporate change in countries' regulatory landscapes, ensuring that our indices remain timely and relevant. And we are currently working on enhancing our research methodologies, processes, and IT infrastructures to introduce this new format to the world, we hope by next year. This format also seeks to build upon some synergies with our new policy tracker, which Sergio will shortly talk about next, but also create a healthier work environment for our colleagues.
Thanks, Flor, and thanks everyone in the audience for joining us today. My name is Sergio Chaparro Hernandez, and I am pleased to guide you today on an early sighting of one of our future tools. The Tax Justice Policy Tracker is a collaborative tool to be developed gradually over the long term that complements our indices, our illicit financial flows vulnerability tracker, and our data portal. It is the result of the collective effort of many hardworking people who have combined their skills to make it possible. This tool aims to track how countries are progressing on a set of priority policies to advance tax justice and the positions they are taking on them. The policies to be tracked comprise historical demands of the global tax justice movement that have also been endorsed by high-level expert panels, such as the UN FACTI panel. These policies are set out in what we have called the ABCDEF triple G of tax justice in TJN's new strategic framework. A pilot version of the tracker will be launched in early November. This pilot version will start tracking for 193 UN member states their positions towards a UN tax convention in connection with the historic draft resolution that has been recently tabled by the African Group before the UN General Assembly. In the coming years, the tracker will gradually incorporate other policies, starting with public country-by-country reporting, automatic exchange of information, and beneficial ownership registration. For each policy, the tracker will provide a position and a grade for each country. The position will indicate the country's stance on the given policy, meaning if a country is a leader, supporter, opponent, or blocker of that policy. We hope that our activity of monitoring public statements and votes in spaces such as the United Nations will be complemented by inputs from partners and allies with a view to gather information close to real time that can serve the tax justice movement and beyond to inform the design of their advocacy strategies. Such a tool can significantly enhance the movement's intelligence and capacity to gather and use information that would otherwise remain decentralized and dispersed among many actors. Grades will assess the country's current legislation and some policy implementation dimensions related to the policy in question. To that end, we will rely primarily on research gathered by the Financial Secrecy and the Corporate Tax Haven Index, with a mechanism for external users to provide feedback to fill data gaps and provide near real-time fact-checked updates. In doing so, we hope to provide a tool that can serve policymakers, researchers, journalists, and civil society alike to identify where the areas of progress and bottlenecks are, and what specific actions states can implement to advance the policy solutions that the tax justice movement advocates for. TJN is committed to developing methodologies for highlighting the differentiated responsibilities that countries have in tackling the problems of the current international tax architecture. For instance, our State of Tax Justice report shows that the axis of tax avoidance, meaning the UK's Second Empire, along with the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Switzerland, is responsible for more than half of corporate tax laws globally, inflicting significant damage on the ability of other states to mobilize resources to fulfill the rights of their peoples. When assessing progress on key policies to combat these abuses, these differentiated responsibilities must be highlighted. We would like to start a dialogue with partners from the tax justice movement, particularly from the Global South, to design the methodologies the policy tracker will use in a way that allows the movement to align visions, converge around common demands, and build shared metrics. TJN is committed also to maximize synergies and complementarities with other tools developed by partners and allies, including the anti-illicit financial flows policy tracker that TJN is currently developing. Looking ahead to the next decade, the tax justice movement will face enormous challenges such as huge power imbalances in the global tax architecture and increasingly aggressive corporate attempts to capture decision-making spaces. It will also need to confront the strategies of those resisting the implementation of innovative policy solutions to reprogram tax systems for the benefit of people and the planet and to protect their own interests. The tools the movement has at its disposal can make a difference in these struggles. So, inspired by the power of collaboration and the need to challenge the narratives that perpetuate tax injustices, we want to put this tool at the service of the tax justice movement and beyond. The success of the policy tracker will depend on it being built and owned by the movement. So we call on our partners and allies, as well as on journalists, policymakers, funders, and the public to use this collaborative tool extensively and help us to improve it with their input. Thank you very much, and stay tuned for further developments. And I would like to pass it over to Miroslav.
Thank you very much, Flora and Sergio. I'll share my screen quickly. So over the past 20 years in our mission to transform our tax systems, we have relied, among others, on quantitative research and data. And during that process, we have collected a substantial wealth of knowledge, which results in a comprehensive database focused on tax havens and financial secrecy. Today, we're thrilled to launch the Tax Justice Network's data portal, a powerful tool for accessing all of our internal databases, as well as additional relevant data from international organizations and academic sources. The portal acts as a one-stop shop for journalists, researchers, and civil society working with us on mitigating the negative effects of unjust tax systems. Our commitment has always been to share our research and data openly, fostering transparency and accessibility. While we have always provided access to the underlying data for our research reports, our new data portal takes this a step further. It allows you to effortlessly search across our tools and products and download specific data points, making it an invaluable resource for your research needs. We believe data is at the heart of modern society, enabling us to identify trends, patterns, and effects of reforms. It guides our collective efforts and informs us where we must focus to create meaningful change. As we have seen summarized today, in our 20-year journey, we've acted as a catalyst for the global tax justice movement. And our work has made us a go-to resource for stakeholders in the media, research organizations, and government institutions alike. The data portal is a comprehensive resource encompassing data from existing tools and products, as well as external sources. It covers a broad range of variables, from beneficial ownership registration thresholds to the openness of civil court proceedings. Navigation around the data portal is straightforward. It offers a variety of download formats for the chosen datasets. For non-commercial use, we of course offer full free access, while commercial use requires a paid subscription license. Now we're launching the data portal today in its beta version, but our data collection is an ongoing and evolving effort. And so we expect that new features and data will continually be added to the data portal as we go. We invite you to explore this valuable new resource and encourage you to share your insights and stories. And we believe that data is only as valuable as the narrative it constructs. And so we look forward to hearing about the compelling narratives that you unearth using our data portal. Thank you very much for your attention.
It's clear that TJN has a very ambitious research agenda, and I thank the trio for sharing all of that information with us. And now, as we wrap up our session today, we will cut away to a few more messages from the organization's supporters and partners. But before we do that, I just want to offer a few final remarks myself. And to say that there clearly are a lot of topics to explore here. And when I think about tax justice and tax policy, I think about several themes personally. I think about inclusivity. I think about partnership and collaboration. And also I think about cooperation. Now, one may say that these words mean the same thing, but I think that they all have their own slight nuances. It is possible to collaborate, but without full collaboration, full cooperation from all sides. It is possible to bring parties to a negotiating table, but they sit there as unequal participants and not as full partners. And I say all of that to say that the future of tax justice relies on a full embrace of understanding each other's positions. And when we have clear understanding, at that point, it should be easier to craft solutions that are accessible to the widest range of stakeholders possible. And I would say that it is clear from today's presentation and reflections on the Tax Justice Network's past 20 years that the organization's focus over the past 2 decades has been on building awareness and shifting narratives and also crafting solutions. And it is also clear that the group is laser focused on intensifying that work in the coming years. So with that, I thank you all for joining us today. My warm thanks to our panelists, to our attendees as well. And I will leave you with some closing remarks from our video.
I want to congratulate the Tax Justice Network on its 20th anniversary. 20 years of fighting for tax justice around the world. It has done this on a strong foundations of path-breaking research and compelling advocacy. It has moved the needle. I say this on my own behalf, and on behalf of the Independent Commission on Reform of the International Corporate Taxation, which I co-chair and which marches with you in working towards tax justice. Oliver Wendell Holmes famously said, "Taxes are the price we pay for civilization, and an unjust tax system undermines our democracy, our society, and our economy." Regrettably, no one would call the tax system in any country really just. but some are far more unjust than others, with those at the top and rich corporations paying a far less share of their income than those less well off. The tax code is riddled with special provisions, exemptions, and loopholes, not accidents, but deliberately put there by those with political power to advantage themselves and their friends, and is done in ways that are deliberately not transparent. And that is why it requires those with the depth of knowledge and the commitment of those in the tax justice network to expose what is going on. It is not easy. Of course, as an economist, I have to mention how our unjust tax system is also an inefficient tax system, distorting the economy as it distorts our society. But an unjust tax system is far more pernicious for our society than that. And one of the strengths of the Tax Justice Network is that you have always kept that broader picture in mind. Let me congratulate you on what you have done. I look forward to your continued work and your continued success in helping create globally a just tax system.
In Mozambique, we say that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the next best time to plant a tree is now. And it gives me great pleasure and honor to celebrate with the Tax Justice Network 20 years of existence. Incidentally, it's also my birthday the same week. So it was quite a nice surprise to realize that 10 years for the Global Alliance as well. And if I was to reflect on all the changes and developments in the world over the past 20 years, I have to say that the Tax Justice Network has certainly been center and at the front of a lot of these developments, has had incredible amount of people and support from across the world, and I hope that it will continue. I think it's becoming a mainstream issue more and more. The world is now talking about taxation in a very different light from what it was doing 20 years ago. And I have been with them inside the organization. I've been watching from the sidelines, but also I continue to be part of it as a senior advisor. And it gives me great pleasure and joy to wish you a happy birthday. And if I was to say anything in closing, it would be another proverb, this time from Ghana, where it says, a single bracelet does not jingle. And I think that that is testimony to the fact that we need to work together in international cooperation and assistance, globally as individuals, communities, societies, institutions, for this to really take a whole of world approach. And I look forward to being part of the process with you. Happy birthday, TJN.
Taxation is at the heart of the social contract between citizens and the state. Tax justice, promoting equitable tax systems, challenging tax evasion and avoidance on a global scale, tax transparency, and especially the fight against tax havens. These have been amongst the leading contributions by the Tax Justice Network, a formidable organization. The publication of the State of Tax Justice 2020 has, amongst others, brought attention to the $427 billion in tax abuse through tax evasion and avoidance. This was a global wake-up call. And most recently, the work of Tax Justice Network in support of the Africa Group at the United Nations, which saw the adoption of a resolution to the establishment of a United Nations-based body on tax. These are but some of the remarkable achievements of the Tax Justice Network. And now, in its 20th year of existence, we want to say happy 20th anniversary. We at ATAF, the African Tax Administration Forum, assure you of our unwavering support to your work as we all proceed to the next decade to make this world a better, more just and equitable place for its citizens. Happy birthday.